Okay, Chris Krameyer from Beyond Housing is still with us, and joining us in this conversation now is David Erickson from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. David, you were in town for the same reason that Elizabeth was in town, that conversation with St. Louis County. But I guess first, just what's this Federal Reserve's role in this? What's your stake in this conversation?
Yeah, I get that question often. So the Federal Reserve cares deeply about the plight of low-income Americans, in part because that's an important part of the economy, the macroeconomy, and that's the Fed does the best it can to sort of promote policies that can get low-income people into the economic mainstream. We're also a bank regulator, so we enforce among other laws that affect the banking industry, the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977, which is the Anti-Redlining Act, which really requires banks to lend back into the neighborhoods where they take deposits, and so that lending activity really is the backbone of an anti-poverty effort we call community development. That's about $100 to $150 billion a year invested back into low-income communities.
Okay, so you have looked at this from the national perspective on community development strategies. What have you learned?
Well, you know, we actually wrote a book about this. It has very similar conclusions to Elizabeth and Alan's book on the fact that the types of interventions that seem to work are these types that are comprehensive, they're place-based, they're cross-sector, and by that I mean it's affordable housing, it's improving the schools, it's access to nutritious food and other health promoting options, it's working on public safety and crime, and so that you sort of have this sort of comprehensive approach that sort of has much better outcomes than if you just try to do these projects one at a time. And so we wrote a book called Investing in What Works for America's Communities, and that book's available online at whatworksforamerica.com. But again, it's sort of, in many cases, what we focused on were these examples where people were already doing this work in that manner. The systems aren't really set up that way, so it really requires some very capable people. What we sort of often joke is the charismatic super genius, someone like a Chris Krameyer, who's able to sort of take the existing systems as they are and really sort of cajole and bring them together so that they can sort of provide that comprehensive intervention that's so effective.
Yeah, Chris, I'm actually, you know, people may have heard in the news recently 24-1 when we're talking about the situation with the Normandy School District. 24-1 is kind of coming to mind for me here. Kind of refresh us on what it is, and is that what we're talking about?
Sure. So 24-1 is an initiative in the boundaries of Normandy School District. There are 24 communities. This is the way we do it in St. Louis.
Right.
In the boundaries of one school district, and they have one collective vision to create strong communities, engaged families, and successful children. Our role is to listen to the voice of the community and try to be the facilitator, convener, herder of cats, and doer. So in the work, as David described and as the book describes, our role is try to bring people together around common issues and common needs, recognizing that our organization, while we do some things like build housing and build grocery stores, we're about to build a movie theater, but the issues of the community are so broad and varied that we need to bring other partners with us to say, how do we focus on those things that are important to the lives of the families and to this neighborhood, and how do we ensure that they are intentionally integrated together? So we're touching housing, we're touching education, we're touching health, jobs, and economic development, and doing it all intentionally, because we feel the idea of looking for the silver bullet, if we just do this one thing in community, it's easier to think that way, but the reality is it has failed many, many times in many places across the country. So what Works talks about is different places have different needs, but unless you're tackling all of them, unless you have one entity like Beyond Housing who kind of corrals everybody together and helps, again, align all the resources together based upon community needs, then, again, we're not going to be effective over time.
You said super genius, but you've used the term quarterback, I believe, as well.
Yes.
We're a sports town. That might be an analogy we can wrap our head around a little bit.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So you know, it's not without its controversy, because you don't want to have, I mean, collaboration sometimes requires people to sort of take the lead but not take credit, you know, and sometimes the football, the quarterback tends to be sort of the hero, the sort of a little bit more macho, but I'm sticking with it because, and there are other sort of terms that have been thrown out, like the symphony conductor or the band leader or the wedding planner or what have you. I mean, somebody who does this organizing there are many terms for it, but I'm sticking with the quarterback in part because I think you really do need one entity that has the responsibility to sort of, that's either rewarded or punished for the outcome. Because what we've experienced so far is we've had these collaborations, but it just involves people, it's sort of parallel play, you know, with children, where they'll sit next to each other and they'll do what the activities are that they do, whether it's education or housing or economic development. But to really integrate, you need somebody running that process.
So is it the county government? Is that a nonprofit?
It can be different. It can be different entities in different places. So sometimes it's a nonprofit. Sometimes it's county government. A mayor can play this role. Sometimes we've seen the faith community come in and be that person. Universities anchor institutions like hospitals and university campuses. You know, it plays out very differently in different places. But you definitely just need somebody who can be the leader.
Are we seeing any successes that we can point to either nationally or here locally? Because the picture that Elizabeth paints is not very good about the rapid expanse of poverty in our suburbs.
I'll let you talk on the national scene.
Sure. So I would say I say there's several examples of the national scene where we see this type of activity. You know, William Gibson is a writer who says the future is here. It's just unevenly distributed, right? And so we see things at the Harlem Children's Zone in New York City, purpose-built communities in Atlanta, Neighborhood Centers Inc. in Houston. These are all examples of quarterbacks that have done amazing work in coordinating the comprehensive intervention that we know that works, and their outcomes speak for themselves. I mean, they turn those communities around, and it's dramatic. It's harder in a suburban setting to make this happen. Sometimes you can do it at the regional level. We've seen some very good examples in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, St. Paul, for example, around transit-oriented development, a new train station where they were able to sort of run it through some low-income communities and use that investment as a catalyst for bringing different groups together. But in terms of a suburban example, this one is a harder nut to crack.
Why is that? Are we not rubbing up against each other as much in the suburbs? What's the challenge of the suburb?
I think part of it is that there's often not one leader. You know, in some place like New York or Chicago, you have a mayor perhaps, or in Cleveland, you have the Cleveland Clinic or some of these big hospital systems. There's a kind of a big entity that's sort of able to throw the weight around a little bit. I think in the suburbs, you just have, it's harder to find that one institution that sort of seems to be a little bit head above the rest.
Look, I think what we've seen in our work is we've seen great transactional results, right? We've built a lot of stuff. We're providing a lot of services. The challenge becomes the significance of poverty and what it does is so pervasive that for us, we've been doing this for about 4 years now, right? And we've seen some positive strides. We still have a long way to go. We're confident we're on the right track. For us, it's really about resources. I mean, at the end of the day, again, we have a pretty good idea about how to do this. We've got lots of great partners around the table. But until we get to scale, right? So again, not-for-profits have a great history of doing a program for 100 kids that cost, $100,000, right? And we do it scattered all throughout the region versus saying, if we could focus our talent, our energy, and the competencies that many of us have in a geography and intentionally work together and then get to scale, right? So if there's a great program in the Normandy School District that serves 100 kids, it's great for the 100 kids, but it's not going to move the needle on the systemic challenges that the kids or a school district will face. So we believe we're trending in the right direction. We believe that, again, the resources are starting to come, that the successes are starting to come, but with the issues in Normandy, every day there's a new challenge and a new hurdle to clear. But again, I think if we can create a model that says, yes, if you work together intentionally like others across the country have, we're confident we're going to have success. It just won't happen tomorrow.
Can I jump in on that? Just in terms of resources, I think two promising areas where we're going to see some new dollars flowing for that kind of activity are, one is around health. And what we find is, when you look at the causes of premature death, for example, you would think that the leading cause of that might be either you had no access for medical care or you got bad medical care. But in fact, when you look at it, it only accounts for about 10 to 15% of the cases of premature death. So it's very strange to know that your doctor has very little to do with your health. And if something's broken, you want something to fix it. But in terms of your sort of health, it's actually these other circumstances, your social circumstances, the environment you're in, the neighborhood you're in, that have much more of a contributor or much more of a contribution to your overall health. And so this has gotten to the point where the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has made this phrase very famous, where your zip code is more important than your genetic code for your health. And if you are in the zip code improving business, the way Chris is, pretty soon you're going to start seeing people who want to see an improvement in health outcomes coming to him and say, I need to start spending more money on what you're doing, so I'll spend less money on type 2 diabetes or other chronic diseases, or a lot of these other issues that are really starting to bankrupt the medical care system. So you're going to start seeing a lot of money start flowing this way, not just because of the Affordable Care Act, but the medical care industry was moving in that direction already. The second area where you're going to start seeing some new resources is what is called pay-for-success financing. And if you get an opportunity to Google Pay for Success and Federal Reserve, you'll get a collection of essays that we did on this. But one of them is the social impact bond, which has gotten a lot of press. And the idea is that you pay for these upstream interventions that can save money downstream in terms of things like incarceration costs or emergency room visits or special education costs in our schools. And there are a lot of these types of interventions that save tremendous amount of money. So it really is a very promising source of financing in the near future for more of this type of work.